we're going to talk about the top 6 ways that you are a strategic leader, whether you know it or not. Let's move on to number 4. You ask the right questions and you tell it like it is. If you have, or if you know young children, you're probably very familiar with the ever-present question. Why? 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 Children are naturally curious, and that's a good thing. But so are we as grant leaders. We just love knowing things, and we know that funders do too. As grant leaders, we are usually not enmeshed in the day-to-day of our organization's programs, so we can adopt an outsider's perspective. And if you are involved in both program and grant writing, imagine yourself switching hats so you can see things from both different viewpoints. Here are a few sample questions that we grant leaders like to ask of our team, because we know that funders want to know the answers. What makes you uniquely suited to carry out the project? Certain people might have special skills or background that no one else has. What stories can you tell about the people who have benefited from the program? And what difference did that make in their lives? You might want to have someone start a story bank, that is, stories that you can pull from in your grant proposals. And yes, that someone might end up being you. Next, can you answer the key question? So what? What's the real difference that your organization is making? And why should anyone care? Especially a funder. This is usually the hardest question for people to answer because they're kind of assuming that everyone else knows why it's so important, because they do, right? We live and breathe it every day, so we know why it's important, but not everyone knows the answer to the so what question. So we might have to be very, very clear, and we might have to do some education around the so what. Of course, you're identifying goals, objectives, and specific outcomes. But how did your organization arrive at the program in the first place? Sometimes knowing that can be important to funders. How did you come up with that plan? And finally, while evaluation is always going to be in the plan, how will you measure what actually matters to your clients? And how will you use those results? Often, your team members will thank you for asking those questions that only they know the answers to. They're the experts after all, and sometimes your questions can help them think more clearly through a problem or a concept. Kind of an outside perspective can help them really make sure that that piece of information is clearly communicated. So while you're not designing the program per se, you are serving as the eyes and ears of a funder. But it's actually not just about the questions you ask. Sometimes you have to tell it like it is. Someone's got to be the bad guy, right? It's always easier to leave that job to someone else. But when it comes to grant seeking, that dirty task might fall to you. And if it does, you can handle it. As a leader, you are willing to burst some bubbles. That is, some people on your team may want to go down an alley that you already know leads nowhere. And if that's true, you have to let them know that. I'm sure we can all think of examples of this. That bubbly new board member who thinks a big national foundation like Ford or MacArthur would be the perfect funder for your local school's cleanup project. or the inexperienced executive director who wants to apply for that large federal grant, even though you know that it's not a good match. And the complex application is due next week. Now you know that's a bad idea. How about when you're asked to get more grants in the door, but you can't even get the basics, like a mission statement, or financial information, or evaluation criteria? A recent student of mine in my Grantwriters Fast Track coaching program had that exact situation. She had to call a large meeting at her organization to explain to her team that they were not ready to ask for grants just yet. She outlined what steps they needed to take to get there. If you're a strong, confident leader, you will not intentionally steer your team off course.